Will it be the Main Street Republicans who figure a way out of this?
You know, Joe, I think it's a case where we need to make sure that the Senate today makes the vote and comes back today. Now, whether that happens or not, I don't know. But I know that every day of shutdown goes on, more pain is felt by more people. And when I'm chairman of the VA, I know about where we're going to see those shortfalls. Right now we have several, though we have put a front load on the medical, most of the medical providing, and most veterans won't leave it out on their main services, which is their health care. But when you start talking about TAP programs, people leaving the military, when you start talking about the Fox grants, those Fox grants are special grants set up for contractors provide mental health. When you start talking about daycare workers for those people that are homebound veterans, those are all on contracts. Yeah. We're trying to work with the Secretary at this time to make sure those keep going, but each day we go further, that is the more and more danger. Remember, we in the House, we've done our job, we send it to the Senate keeps bringing it back up. There's those holdouts, they need to go ahead and open government, and then we can look into all the other things they're bringing up, because those are those things that we can negotiate while we work on this budget, but not while we're in a shutdown.
Understood your point. Mr. Chairman, we spoke with the Secretary, Doug Collins, about what this means for the agency and what it means for the delivery of veterans services ahead of our conversation with you today. Here's what the Secretary told us.
The positive news to our veterans, especially for those who get 9 million plus who get their health care through us, that they're not going to see any difference in what they have seen. Our vet centers are still open. The counseling is going on. Our mental health outreach and placement are still going on. So this is a good time for that. And I think really is to look through this is we're going to do what we have to do to take care of our veterans, and we have the funding to do that.
Did the Secretary frame that appropriately? Because his message that evening was that benefits are not being affected by this. You're looking down the road, though, Congressman. How long before they are?
And let me tell you that right now we are already operating without without the ability of Congress to authorize those particular side contracts. Everything the Secretary was talking about is the actual function of the VA, that is the VA not contracted. As we're moving forward, we're a little bit worried as those contracts are starting to not have authorization number. Are those things that can lose out? Your health care is still going to be there. Your appointments are still going to be there. However, when we start talking about the TAP program, that's service members leaving. When you start talking about home care, when you start talking about the Fox grants, which is mental health, we have other mental health programs. But each one of these is important in itself for certain individuals. We're okay now, and I'm glad we are, but we've got to pay attention. This can't go out for a long time.
Some are suggesting we could have another record here. I'm not sure anybody has a clue at this point, Congressman, as long as the leadership are not engaged cross aisle here. And I just wonder what you think. The president mentioned last evening from the Oval Office that talks were underway with Democrats on health care. Is that a plan that could be done through back channels, that could be done quietly to bring Democrats to the table, or does there need to be some sort of grand bargain here that involves government spending?
I really believe that if we come back and then we can work on that. Remember, that problem doesn't come to fruition until the 31st of January. This CR only gives us to the 21st of November. So we come back, we start negotiating these things. But the reason why this is difficult to negotiate is just that. It's difficult to negotiate. Even though we don't want to see anyone lose their health care, if we're having to subsidize the health care, there's a problem with the health care system in the first place. And we're not subsidizing the individuals, we're subsidizing the insurance companies. So therefore, the minds need to come together. But they don't need to come together by scaring our general public in a shutdown. We need to come back to work. We need to go to work on these problems. We're not saying they're not there and we don't need to work on them, but we can't be working on them while we're playing these games and you're holding things hostage. But if you look at our Democrat colleagues, many of the leaders on the other side, 13 times they voted to keep the government open with this same type of clean CR when Biden was in and gave quotes like, we shouldn't hold the American people hostage. We've got to make sure that we don't use it as a negotiating tool. Instead, we keep the government open so that we can continue to negotiate. That's exactly what they said. They were right then, they're right now, that would be right now, and that's what we're saying.
Congressman, our listeners and viewers should know that your 12th district in Illinois is not part of Chicago. It's
not
down
at all.
the southern part of the state. You're closer to St. Louis than you are Chicago, actually, in the western part of your district.
Yeah, St. Louis is the northern part of my district. St. Louis is the northern part of my district, and I have 1/3 of the state's land mass. So,
so
my major
all of that
employer
said, you got a lot of farms there too. You've got a lot of farms, Congressman, and I'm wondering. So what are you hearing from the White House on this? Does there need to be a bailout? Should it come from tariff money? How do you handle this? If they're not buying soybeans in China, what do you do?
Yeah, we've been talking with the administration on specifically that. The tariff money, some kind of situation to help many of these farmers through this time. Understand these farmers, many of them are 4 years into their banks. 4 years into their banks where they haven't turned a profit. You can only do that so long. This would be the time to give them that opportunity while we're building those markets. I'm really, really glad that he's meeting with Canada today. Now, let me explain this, that he was right, he needed to meet with Canada, because if you're a grain farmer, it's one thing. And the USMCA was a good deal in itself. However, remember this, when you start talking certain key products like dairy, which we provide from northern Illinois and Wisconsin, or would like to provide into Canada, Canada has a 400% tariff. When we start talking about 30%, that sounds amazing, that sounds huge. But Canada has 400% tariff on the United States. Hopefully we can work through to get fair trade, like the president has always talked about, and I trust the president to do that.
What happens first, a farmer bailout or a deal with China that starts soaking up some of these soybeans?
So the way it looks right now is probably the using the tariff money to help those existing farmers, because we're so far into it, unless these negotiations go with China very, very quickly. Now remember, we have to renegotiate with China, because China, what they do is, when they allowed China into the World Trade Organization, they probably shouldn't have done that in the first place, because you're supposed to be a free government that to be part of the world trade, but that happened. Ever since then, China will come in and they'll take the commodities, whether it's soybeans or corn or whatever, and they're going to say they're going to purchase this large amount at the beginning of the planting season. Farmers will go out and plant all these the commodities, whether it's corns or soybeans or wheat, and all of a sudden, then China says, oh, we don't need that much, which causes the market to fall. The commodity now is a cheaper rate, and the farmer's out there trying to figure out how he or she is supposed to get the rate that they need to even make a profit at all. And so that's the problem when we're dealing with China, why we need to push them back to the table. Because it's either...
And so your farmers...
Yeah, my farmers are hurt.
Your farmers feel like Lucy in the football here. Do they make off with the dollar figures that we're hearing about? Is it $10 billion the president puts in a fund? What do you need?
That dollar amount is being negotiated with the chairman right now, both in the House and the Senate. G.T. Thompson is working very hard with his staff to make sure and informing us as we're moving right now. Because, you know, if a farmer's going to make it through, then you want to provide them a little bit of help. But if they're really the ones that are young farmers, or because the mega farms quite often, they hurt, but they've got enough in reserve. It's those that don't have in reserves. And so trying to get those numbers squeezed through the USDA and figuring that out is where we're at right now.
Really, really interesting. You know, we heard about back pay for federal workers when the president was talking with reporters in the Oval Office. Mr. Chairman, I don't mean to sneak up on you here because you might not have heard what he said, but there was a question about some folks not getting back pay, and he said some people don't really deserve to be taken care of. He wouldn't tell us when we followed up who he meant. Do you have a sense of who he was talking about, and do you support that view?
I don't know who he was talking about, and you know, the speaker also was asked about this morning. I'll say what the speaker said. We've always made sure that our employees are made whole on back pay. So I would say if we don't do that again, that'll be a rarity. But the thing is, if we get this done, we don't have to worry about back pay. And I'm going to tell you, I know how that is. As a young Marine, remember I was up in during the Carter administration and Reagan, but during the Carter administration, Marines and their families qualified for food stamp and WIC if they had it then, but they didn't. And so instead, what you do is you worry from payday to payday for young Marines with a spouse and with children. And those are the ones that we're seeing out there that are going to need the help, and they're going to just be dealing with when the 15th rolls around. If they're living payday to payday, how do you go back to your creditors? Not everybody's got a parent that they can go back and reach to and say, hey, I'd really like you to send me money until I get through this. That's not how that works. Unfortunately, no pay due is a very, very bad thing for those people who make sure our freedoms are taken care of.